Hello, everyone, and welcome to the review of your needs assessment in terms of the guidelines and expectations for this assignment. I'm going to quickly share my screen so we can go through this step by step. So the purpose of this is that I often get feedback saying that it's sometimes just easier to work through these assignments if there's a corresponding video, if the instructor can really talk the student through each step of the assignment to break it down. It might be clearer than just reading it off the page. So I'm also going to try to sprinkle some wisdom into this based on experiences that students have had in the past with this assignment. So just to recap, this needs assessment is our first major assignment in this class, Social Work 668. It is due on week 6. We are currently now in week 3. So you have about 3 weeks to get things rolling with this assignment, which is a good thing because this is not exactly an assignment that you can write at the last minute. It's not really that kind of paper. It's a paper in which you are going to have to go out into the community and collect data to produce the paper. So what I want you to start thinking about very clearly, and hopefully your week 1 assignment for this course prepared you for thinking about an organization or a population of focus that you would like to partner with in order to bring this assignment to fruition. So when we think about needs assessments, we as social workers often assess our clients' needs all the time. That could be, conducting a thorough needs assessment to determine a need of an individual client. It can be working with the entire family system to thoroughly assess needs and then come up with some kind of action plan or some kind of goals with that family. So similar when working with organizations and planning a program to be able to evaluate, we need to work with our population of focus to determine what that need is in order to be able to implement a corresponding program that makes sense in terms of that need. So when we think about the long-term goals in this assignment of developing a proposal for a program and developing a proposal for an evaluation later on, the needs assessment is really the foundation that we are going to build from. So needs assessments can help determine groups' needs. It can also help us to determine what the organization and community services are already providing. So there's no need to duplicate or replicate services. We can also identify gaps in services. So what programs haven't been created yet that we think could be useful or that the population of focus thinks could be useful. And then we can develop programs that can provide, best alternatives for meeting those needs that you have identified in the needs assessment process. So just to avoid confusion, we first lay out this assignment so that there are 8 steps. The paper actually has 5 sections, but in order to write the paper, you do need to complete these 8 steps because this has to do with identifying your group, developing an interview guide, collecting data using that interview guide, doing some analysis of your data, and then writing the paper. So we're going to go through this step by step. So first you have to determine your group, a population of focus. So these can be service providers or people that work within the social work profession, or they can be clients or people living in a community of focus. So just to give you an example, I'm working on 2 needs assessments simultaneously, one with the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, and that is focused on an organization. So the population of focus are child welfare workers that work in the family safety program. And through that process, we identified that there was a need for an improved onboarding or employee orientation program that is embedded within the Cherokee cultural context. So that is an example of a needs assessment that was done with an organization. I've also worked on a needs assessment in Vietnam with grandparents who are raising grandchildren due to the HIV crisis in a very specific region. And that was a very large scale needs assessment, which we were tasked with identifying and locating every family that had a grandparent who was raising grandchildren due to HIV/AIDS in that particular region. So that's an example of like a large scale needs assessment with a population of focus that is not exactly situated within an organization, but you're just identifying grandparents that meet this certain inclusion criteria. So hopefully you can see the difference between those and that you can sort of design and tailor your needs assessment based on social work employees or workers, or potentially people who would be clients or utilizing services within the community. Okay, and so we have to determine the group before we do anything because we have to understand who we're going to interview for this needs assessment. So we want that is going to task us with developing some kind of inclusion criteria. So we want this to be a bounded group that share common characteristics. And if you're identifying social work employees, that could be that you could identify people across different levels of working. So you could maybe have a case manager, a clinical supervisor, and a director of a program. That is perfectly okay as long as they're all working with the same participant population. I hope that makes sense. So step 2, you want to determine whether you want to focus on an organization or a population of focus. So exactly what we've been talking about previously. Step 3, you want to identify a rationale for the needs assessment. So what are you attempting to discover? How will the information be used? What are you hoping to accomplish? So we don't want to just, produce a rationale out of thin air. It's better if we really ground this needs assessment in some kind of gap that exists in the literature, some sort of knowledge or wisdom that you have through working directly with this community. That's why I always encourage students who take this class to partner with an agency or participant population that you already have an existing connection to, because you probably have a better sense of what the needs are already. We're still going to need to collect data, but you will be better prepared to develop a rationale if you do so. Then you're going to identify your project partners. These are practitioners, administrators, workers, policymakers. If you are focusing on an organization, you want to identify 3 project partners to interview. If you're focusing on a community, you want to identify 3 project partners within the community who provide services. So there's also some examples here of what it means to be a service recipient versus a service provider versus others that you might want to consider interviewing as well. Okay, step 5, you have to identify questions. So this is really where you develop a corresponding, what I like to call interview guide / questionnaire. So we want to engage in research-informed practice. So it's important for us to have an understanding of empirical literature related to your group. So I want you to conduct a brief literature review that identifies 5 to 7 peer-reviewed journal articles published within the last 10 years. We want them to be recent and relevant. So this literature will help inform your questions as well as your findings. So it's going to help situate the development of your interview guide, because we're not just going to pull research questions or interview guide questions out of thin air. We also want to connect them to existing literature. Okay, so for example, if you are going to potentially develop your interview guide, I previously had a student, let's say, that did hers with actually Kent School master's students in terms of wanting to develop some sort of peer support process online during the COVID-19 pandemic. She went out in the literature and she found that with online learners, there is a gap in terms of social support and isolation that can lead to poor mental health outcomes within graduate schools. So she started with that rationale, and then she built her interview guide questions to kind of get at that problem or that situation of concern that she found in the literature. And then she connected it back later when she analyzed her findings and looked at implications. So just one example of many. We can work through this one-on-one as well. So next you have to conduct interviews. This is when you actually have to get out and talk to people. So you schedule an interview with a participant in this process. Interview should last at most 15 minutes. Ideally, I'd like you to audio tape them and transcribe them. Sometimes people request not to be recorded. And in that case, it's totally fine. I would just recommend that you take detailed notes. Step 7, I want you to do a thematic analysis, which we are going to learn more about in week 4 and 5. So do not worry if this is making you nervous right now. But we want to identify 3 themes from the interview. So themes are often things that multiple people say or say throughout their interview. So you're going to identify some sort of commonality between all 3 interviews, which you can tie to developing needs for this assignment. And then you want to be able to provide supporting documentation for your themes, which are your participants' direct quotes. Those are really your data for qualitative data analysis. Step 8, you're going to provide an overview of your findings. So you're going to focus on implications for social work practice. You're going to focus on your conclusions. You're going to focus on next steps. And as all good researchers, you are going to also identify some limitations of your research. So let's get down to the 5 sections of the paper. We've gone through all 8 steps, but what is the paper actually going to look like in terms of an outline? Well, here it is. So section 1, you're going to identify your group. You're going to identify whether it's an organizational or community focused needs assessment. I've just given you examples of both of those, and you're going to provide a rationale with citational evidence. So I want you to include literature in this opening section. Section 2, you're going to describe your project partners. So who are the 3 people that you interviewed? You're going to provide a description of them. I also want you to let you know that you can protect the anonymity, and please do, of your participants in this process by giving them pseudonyms, or I often like to allow my participants to name themselves. So be sure to do that. Don't give me their real names, for example. Section 3, you're going to talk to me about your interview guide. So what were your interview questions, and give me a rationale grounded in literature as to how you've developed your interview guide. Number 4 are your themes. So this is where you're going to discuss your method for identifying each theme. So you're going to bring in qualitative data analysis, which we're going to learn more about in weeks 4 and 5. You're going to talk about the identification of your 3 major themes, and you're going to provide examples from your recording or interview. So this is where you're going to make a claim about your data, and then you're going to support it with a direct quote from one of your participants. In section 5, we also call findings, but this changes a little bit. So rather than reporting your results, we really want you to connect this to social work practice. So what have you learned from your needs assessment and from your data analysis that can help inform social work practice within your identified program or within your identified community? Based on your findings, identify a program or service that you would like to implement. Now, this is hugely important, right? Because this is the whole purpose of a program evaluation course, is that the needs assessment should be able to link onto the program or practice that you want to develop. So this is where you're really going to introduce for the very first time what kind of program you're going to focus on for the remaining assignments after this, which are the logic model, which is a proposal, and then the program evaluation, which is also a proposal. And then lastly, what are the limitations of your research, and how will you address these limitations in the future? So this paper is pretty concise. It has 5 sections, which are a lot, but the maximum length of this paper is 7 pages. So you have to practice writing concisely in order to be able to do this assignment effectively. Please reach out to me at any time if you have any questions. We are also going to have an upcoming synchronous session which Brandon and I will co-host, which we're going to go through all of your questions and concerns and workshop some of your papers and ideas. So we look forward to seeing you then as well. All right, everyone, take care. Bye.